My name is Malcolm Graham, a member of the Charlotte City Council representing Charlotte City Council District 2, and tonight I'm serving the capacity of Chairman of the City of Charlotte Redistricting Committee, redistricting the districts of the City of Charlotte. First, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce those who are here in the room, and then those who are with us virtually, committee members and staff. So let's start by introducing those who are here in the room with us at the Government Center.
Good evening, Lena James, Deputy City Attorney.
I'm Mac McCarley with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Beverly Sanders, Charlotte Communications and Marketing.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Tom Jones, City Attorney.
Thank you. And now we will introduce those staff and committee members who are with us virtually.
Ed Trees, Committee Member.
Committee Member.
Greg Phipps, Committee Member.
Taiwo Jayota, Planning Director.
And we would like to welcome our mayor who is visiting with us as well. Thank you everyone for being here. These listening sessions are an opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for being with us tonight. These listening sessions are an opportunity to hear directly from residents. Before we get started, I want to go over a few quick housekeeping items. During this listening session portion of this meeting, our goal is to listen and collect feedback from our community. Comments and questions related to the technical side of the process will be best answered by Mac McCauley of the Parker Poe Group and Rebecca Hefner, Director of the Office of Data and Analytics, who are on the call tonight. When it's time for the listening session to begin, please use your raise hand feature to call upon. Staff will keep a list of who is next to speak. And when it's your turn, we will call your name and you will be unmuted. Each person will have 2 minutes to speak. You can also use the question and answer function to type comments as we move throughout the event. Additionally, we will be monitoring comments on YouTube and Facebook. Now I'd like to share a brief overview of the committee last meeting. The recap of our meeting that was held on 9/22. Basically, we received the census information. We reviewed maps options were reviewed. We had 3 maps that we considered for moving forward for public consideration. And those were basically the findings of the last meeting. Again, the committee approved 3 maps that we have, maps A, B, and C, for public consideration. Those maps have been in public circulation for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. At this time, we will begin the listening session. Remember to use the raise hand feature to be called upon. Staff will keep a list of those who is next to be speak. And when it's your turn, we will call you by your name and you'll be unmuted. Each person will have 2 minutes to speak. Please do not repeat comments that have been said by other participants. We have well over 184 folks registered tonight. So if you hear something that has been said before, you do not have to speak. If you have 2 minutes and you can make your comments in a minute or less, that would be appreciated as well. And so with that, if there's any opening comments from our committee members who are with us, if there's not, then we'll move forward. But I'll open the floor to any comments from our committee members before we get started.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, may I say a few words, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Redistricting process is never tidy, and everyone's got their own perspective as to how it needs to be done. Well, our committee's charge was to do the redistricting process in a fair and transparent manner. And I'm grateful for our committee's work, and I'm confident in the results. And I also appreciate Mr. Chairman, Mr. Graham's firm leadership throughout this whole process. And now I look forward to hearing from our residents, and I look forward to hearing their feedback on our process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Ashmere. Mr. Phipps, any comments before we get started? You can have to if
No,
you don't want to.
I don't have any comments. I'm just anxious to hear from the public and get their viewpoints on this redistricting process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Drakes, any comments before we get started?
Mr. Chairman, I just wondered if it would be a good idea to quickly summarize our criteria so people understand how these maps came to be. I'm not offering to do that. I just wonder if it would be a good thing.
Mr. Bacall, I can do it. Mr. Drake, if you feel that would be important. The committee has three options, map A, B, and C. Basically, we have criteria that the committee set. I'm trying to get my criteria so I can be factual as we speak.
I have those, Mr. Chair, if it would be helpful.
No, I have it right here.
Okay.
The order of the first important was to make sure that we have equal population, one person, one vote, as required by law. A district should be reasonably compact. District boundaries may follow neighborhood boundaries or other boundaries of areas containing residents sharing similar interests. I mean, those are the first order of business. Secondly, district boundaries may follow precinct boundaries. District boundaries may be drawn considering the race of the district residents as long as the race is not the predominant motivating factor. Districts most likely to be impacted by future annexation or growth rates may be smaller to maximize impact of future annexations on future redistricting. And district boundaries may be drawn to avoid contest between incumbents. I mean, those were the first and second order of business, Mr. McCarley. I think I'm correct with that. We also met with every council member, at-large members, district representatives, as well as the mayor, and got their feedback and their perspective on the drawing of the maps in terms of community of interest, those things in those particular districts that were important to them, et cetera. And then Mr. McCarley produced maps. We started with 4 maps. We alleviated 1, and we now have 3 maps in front of us, maps A, map B, and map C, that has been in the public domain for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And now we seek public input from the community on those maps. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope participants found that useful, and I look forward to hearing their comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let's get started. Our first speaker is Mark Watson. Welcome, Mr. Watson. Mark Watson going once.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
We can hear you now.
Okay, cool. Hey guys, thanks. So just real quick, I have an agree and disagree column, and I'll try to be quick but not talk too fast. So I agree with the population distribution. That makes sense, right? And I think it's legal. The compactness, I think that's great. We all are hopefully learned about gerrymandering in high school and how it can be used inappropriately. I definitely disagree with the third one. Residents sharing similar interests. It seems like that's pretty vague and subject to broad bias based on who's interpreting that. The secondary criteria, precinct boundaries, sounds like a good idea. Number 2, the race. Pretty sure that we should step away from race and do what we've been trying to do for the last 70 years, and not look at people in terms of race, and move past all that. Number 3, I agree with future growth and arguably maybe atrophy, but I have a question that I can look in the Q&A for, but what is the threshold for how small or big it can be away from the one person, one vote? Number 4, definitely disagree. Avoiding incumbent contests. I think incumbent contests are good because it develops good candidates through competition. One of the major problems we have with politicians is comfortable seats with no challengers. Pelosi and McConnell come to mind. The fact that the committee, without the presence of one member, voted to eliminate creating or maintaining balance with regard to partisan composition. I think that was pretty lame. And a note about the wording on the North Carolina website, the Charlotte, North Carolina website. It mentions Republican advantage in 2 districts while clearly omitting the Democrat advantage in the remaining 5, almost to draw attention to the fact that the evil Republicans are getting 2 districts without acknowledging that 5 are very solidly not Republican. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. There's a question that we have, Mr. McCauley, question from, I guess from Facebook Live. Most of the districts look fairly even, but can anyone explain why District 2 looks so different? Mr. McCauley.
District 2 is one of the ones that would be anticipated to grow, and the idea was that in looking at future districts, we could leave it a little bit smaller. But if you look at that map, the present structure of the district system is that District 4 and 3 are really the 2 that are pretty much what's left after you've done all of the other districts. So it moves basically from right to left, and the oddity of that shape has as much to do with just distributing population equally as anything else. If you look carefully at the map, you'll see that the precincts down in District 6 are relatively small geographically, but that the precincts in 4, for example, or 2 are relatively large. Precincts don't swap evenly. Some of those precincts in District 2 and 4 are rather large for population and for geography.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Next speaker.
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay. Should we use our list? A lot of people have signed up and there's no hand raised. Are there anyone that would love to pose a question or have a comment for the committee and or our consultant?
And also, if you would look into your WebEx, you'll see a small hand raise option. And I just saw, is it Derek Hemphill? Derek Hemphill.
Derek Hemphill, you're.
Rika Hemphill, Derica.
Tarika?
Hi, yes, Dearica. Can you guys hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Hi. So I currently am in District 4, and my husband and I have a question in regards to how would the redistricting affect funding for schools?
Mr. McCarley?
Absolutely nothing about the city council redistricting will affect anything about school attendance lines or school funding. The city doesn't have a primary responsibility for school funding. That's a county function and a state function.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. We have a speaker, no last name, first name, Bertha. Are you with us?
Yes.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having this opportunity. Quickly, I would like to know, on David Cox Road, one side of the street votes just down the street, which you can walk to the school. The other side must go all the way over into another neighborhood. Now, how did they determine this? And what are they considering the boundaries for District 2?
Mr. McCarley.
One of the criteria that the committee is using is to try to use full precincts as the building blocks for the districts. So the precincts, those boundaries are drawn by the Board of Elections, not by the City Council. So where there's some folks are on one side of the line and others on the other side of the line, that's a function of where the Board of Elections has historically drawn the boundary for the precinct. What was the second half of the question?
Could you repeat the second half of your question?
Yes. Who represents David Cox Road? Because there are numerous problems that yet meanwhile we don't know what politician or whom to contact. We need, they use David Cox Road as almost as an expressway. And meanwhile, there's very few signs. And I don't know whether the signs would deter people from driving. And plus, meanwhile, people use this street as a motorcycle speedway. So, and we don't see any cops around here.
I have that noted for you, and I made a note. I think that may be me or Ms. Johnson, depending on where it's at, right? But I noted your issues, and we will respond to them.
If you can tell us what precinct you vote in, we can find you pretty quickly.
Well, I don't go to the other school. It's over in another neighborhood. I usually take advantage of the early voting, which has been at the library.
Your concern is noted, and I will follow up. I think we have your email and contact information.
Yes.
There's one other option for that, and that is if you go on the Board of Elections website, there's a feature called Who Represents Me, and when you fill in your address, the website will pop up for you who represents you on City Council, on County Commissioners, in the State House, the State Senate, and your congressional representative. So if you go on the County Board of Elections website and look for the Who Represents Me tab, you can find out where you are.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us tonight. We have a question in front of us. How is the redistricting process impacting the voting schedule? And what I have in front of me is the timeline that we're working with as a committee. Again, on September 30th, we received the data from the U.S. Census Department. Tonight, October 5th, we have our public engagement session. On October 18th, we'll have a public hearing, which is required by law. Our goal and objective is to present our final recommendations to the City Council on November 8th. November 12th is the deadline to notify the Mecklenburg County Board of Elections if a redistricting plan will not be reached by the November 17th. November 17th is the deadline to report new districts to the Mecklenburg Board of County Elections. Filing for elections is December 6th through the 17th, period for delayed municipal elections. So that will be for Charlotte, Mecklenburg. If the city does not provide a redistricting plan to the Board of Election by November 17th, which we hope we will, the new deadline for the City Council to adopt revised districts becomes December 17th. We hope that is not the case. The partisan municipal primary is March 8th. And the general election is April 26th. This will be for a one-year term for the mayor and all members of the Charlotte City Council. Thank you for the question. Another question, can someone explain the law or rationale that allows politicians to draw the district boundaries? Shouldn't this be done by an impartial body? Mr. McCarley.
Under North Carolina law, the only two groups that have the legal authority to draft these lines are either the legislature or the body that is being redistricted. So in this case, the only two groups that could do these by law are the council or the legislature. There is the possibility of using a citizens advisory committee, but that's fairly difficult this season because of the very shortened schedule for getting the redistricting done in time for that filing period and for the November 17 deadline to have the redistrict line shown to the Board of Elections.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. Another question in front of the committee. What is the threshold for making districts account for growth? Mr. McCarley, and then the follow-up question would be, why do certain districts have 141,000 voters and some many fewer? So the first question is, what is the threshold for making districts account for growth?
There is no specific threshold. The idea was that for those districts that the planning department has indicated to us have a higher likelihood of future growth, the idea was to try and make those slightly smaller than the other districts. That would be districts 3, 2, and 4. but there is no specific threshold. There is a legal requirement that no district be more than 5% above the ideal size or more than 5% below the ideal size. So even if we're going to make one district or two districts smaller than the others, they can be no smaller than 4.99% smaller than the ideal size. Ideal size is to take the city's population and divide it by the number of districts, which is 7.
The follow-up question, Mr. McCarley, was the 141,000 population. Why are some districts larger and some smaller? So I guess the question is about the 125,000 per district.
The 125,000 or whatever I don't remember the exact number. It might be something in the high 124,000 range, is the total population of the city divided by 7. And those that we're trying to get a little bit smaller are those 3 districts, 3, 2, and 4 that are expected to grow. But again, if you look at the size of the precincts in those 3 districts, it is very difficult to move a large number of people. So it is not a simple process.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. We have another speaker, Dole George. Are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Welcome. You have 2 minutes. Mr. George, you have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Okay. Question is this. Why not an 8th district, as suggested by LaWanna Mayfield, with the increase in population in Charlotte?
Could you repeat your question, sir?
Why do we not establish an 8th district, as suggested by LaWanna Mayfield about a week and a half ago on WCNC's Flashpoint?
Well, I'll take that. That was not the charge that was given to the committee by the mayor and the council when they sent it to us. And so our charge was to fulfill the obligations and the charge that was sent to us by the mayor and council. Creating an 8th district was not one of them.
Mr. Chair, it's Ed Driggs. Could I comment on that?
Sure.
I just wanted to note the 8th district was among recommendations made by a citizens group to the council for things that we might consider along with 4-year terms. It was not practical to try to accomplish the creation of an additional district in the time frame that we had available for the redistricting process. So I would say those 2 recommendations are still pending, but they could not be dealt with in the time frame of the work that we're doing on creating these, doing this redistricting. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Okay. In light of redistricting, which current city council members will be impacted? Mr. McCarley.
One of the criteria that the committee has adopted is that the committee will attempt to avoid having incumbents run against each other. It's typically referred to as double bunking, and none of the maps that have been proposed, none of the draft maps that have been moved forward for public comment, double bunk any of the present council members.
Thank you. Another question. Are the population numbers balanced for all 3 maps? Mr. McCarley.
All 3 maps are constitutionally valid. That is that no district is above or below the 5% threshold, but the 3 maps have different numbers attached to them. And if you go on the redistricting website for the city, you can see all of those numbers for each of the 3 draft maps under consideration. But they're all compliant with the constitutional requirement of being inside of that 5% above or below.
All right. And we probably should have started with this question because I think it kind of sets the foundation, Mr. McCarley. Will you give us a quick clarification as to objectives and the difference for the 3 maps options?
See if I can do that. All right. Map A is an attempt to rebalance the districts primarily following a criteria of making the least possible change, moving the fewest possible precincts to bring all of the districts within the 5%. I would mention to you that when we started this, the only district that was constitutionally compliant was District 7. All other districts were either above or below the ideal population by more than 5%. One of them as much as 12% above. So Map A is simply an attempt to bring all of the districts into constitutional compliance with moving the least number of precincts. Maps B and C attempt to follow the rest of the criteria, that is to keep communities of interest together, to account for growth in districts 3, 2, and 4, and all of the maps, by the way, take into account race so that what were traditionally minority-majority districts are still majority-minority districts.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. We have a speaker, Kendrick Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham, welcome.
Hey, thank you for allowing me to speak, Mr. Chairman. I represent Precinct 23, and I wanted to bring attention to you all for Maps B and C about how it goes against the importance of the first order that the committee approved, which was district boundaries may follow neighborhood boundaries or the boundaries of areas containing residents sharing similar interests. Since June, myself and All in Line, which was an organization started by former Attorney General Eric Holder and former President Barack Obama to fight against gerrymandering, have been working to protect the interests of the historic Southwest Corridor, which is all of the neighborhoods that follow the I-77, I-77 highway, the Brookshire Boulevard Highway, I-85, and the Billy Graham Parkway. All the neighborhoods that are boxed into that inner ring, we all vote together. We live in a food desert, so we literally attend the same grocery stores. And Maps B and C literally split our community's vote in half. And our vote is already split in 4 pieces due to the gerrymandering in the state legislature. And any further gerrymandering coming from the Charlotte City Council will continue to exacerbate disparities in our corridor and prevent us from becoming a 10-minute community or even really creating the vision that we want to see. So I just wanted to bring that to your all's attentions. And those precincts that are split out of the historic Southwest Corridor are precincts 23, 24, and 81. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham, for your comment. Question, Mr. McCarley. What prompted the topic of redistricting and who decides and approves the maps?
The reason that the city is redistricting is because 6 of the 7 districts were out of constitutional compliance with the one person, one vote requirement. So the city really has no choice. State law says that the city may redistrict or actually must redistrict after each decennial census if the districts are not in balance, and they are not. So we have to do it. And the redistricting map will be approved by the city council. That's what the state law says.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. Will this redistricting have an adverse effect on non-affluent areas? Mr. McCarley.
The goal of keeping communities of interest together is so that in areas that have a common interest, whether that be race or income or specific issues, for example, you're near the airport or you're near a high development area, the goal is to try and keep communities of interest together. If you make the assumption that the present districts are relatively good at following communities of interest, then the changes that have been proposed in maps A, B, and C don't disrupt the basic premise of the shape of the districts. And all we did was try to move enough precincts to balance population, paying attention to growth potential and to communities of interest.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. There's a question about whether or not we will accept written emails for comments and how long the process will stay open. We will accept emails for comments. So if you want to send an email, You can send it to redistricting@charlottenc.gov. That's redistricting@charlottenc.gov. The process will be open for a while, right? We have a public hearing on October 18th, and the city council votes hopefully on November 8th. And so we will be taking feedback tonight for sure, as well as our public hearing, and until the city council eventually votes. And our goal as a committee is to have something on the mayor's and the council desks on November 8th. Thank you for the question. Is there a map option that would adversely impact a particular council member or party? In other words, would a historically safe district for one party be out for serious challenger from the opposing party as a result of one of these maps? Mr. McCarley.
The answer to that is no. All of the maps maintain a relatively close balance based on partisan registration to the current maps. Of the maps that you see on the website and that are here in the room, probably map B comes closest to maintaining that across the board. But in maps B and C, the two districts that have traditionally elected Republicans do not suffer any degradation of the percentage of Republican registration in those districts. In fact, in one of them, I think they go up about 1%, and the other one they go up about 0.1%.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. Are these maps to be used until the next census? Doesn't it seem that 8 districts should be considered given our growth? Again, the 8th district option is in the council's parking lot. It could be moved from that parking lot by the will of the council, if that's their desire and goal. It has been recommended by a citizen group, not a charge for this committee. So again, that 8th district option concept is in the council's parking lot and can be moved by the will of the council. Please define communities of interest so that we all have the same definition. Mr. McCarley.
There is no precise definition. It really is a subjective determination based on either race or ethnicity or specific issues or income or historic areas. For example, if there are parts of East Charlotte that are generally viewed as having a higher proportion of the immigrant community than the rest of the city, that would be considered a community of interest. But also you can consider something like people who live near the airport and have a concern or questions about noise concerns as being a community of interest. It's whatever is a reasonable thing that people in that area would look at and say, we have a common interest in this issue or in these defining characteristics of the people who live here or the area we live in.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. Could you please add a 4th map to the left of map A, which would be the current map of the existing district layout? Not sure we have that here right now, but we certainly could, I guess, post that somewhere, the existing layout for the district as they are today. So we'll post that probably on the on our link on our website for the redistricting page.
Mr. Chairman, may I add a comment?
The floor is yours.
If you look at the maps that are posted on the website, you will see some of the precincts are shown in a color but also have some cross-hatching on them. What that means is that that precinct has been moved from somewhere else to the new color that it represents. So if you look at the map and you see a cross-hatched precinct that only touches one other district, it probably came from that district, and you'll be able to see what got moved. So each of the maps shows clearly which precincts got moved by the cross-hatching on the new color.
Keep in mind that map A is the map that moves the fewest districts, the fewest precincts. So if you use map A until we can get it, the other one up, you'll see a very close proximity to the districts that we have right now.
Very good point, Mr. Baker. Thank you, Mr. McCarley. Will you be adjusting and reposting maps A, B, and C according to input from tonight in the public hearing? Mr. McCarley.
If the committee in their discussion this evening directs us to make changes, we will do that and we will post those maps. But I'm not going to try to predict what the committee will say at the end of this listening session.
Okay. What is the process for narrowing down the existing 3 maps to just one for city council vote? Who are the decision makers for that narrowing down? That would be the redistricting committee for the Charlotte City Council and the members present here tonight. At the appropriate time, we will make a recommendation to the City Council for their consideration on November 8th. Are there any other districts where the number of registered Republicans was increased? Mr. McCarley.
Statistically insignificant, no. They were all under 1%. In several of these maps, District 7 doesn't change at all because it was so close. It was within 0.1% of being at the ideal number to begin with. And so it doesn't change. District 6 gains a little bit in one of the maps and stays pretty even in the other one. But no, there's not a whole lot of change in the partisan registration in any of the districts on any of the maps.
All right. Are there any other districts where the number of registered Republican was increased?
The answer is pretty much the same, except for map A, which does increase slightly the Democrats in District 6. The others stick pretty close to the existing district demographics for partisan registration. And just to be clear, one of the reasons that's true is because that's where the Republican registration resides. There are pockets of Republican registration in other precincts, mostly out on the far edges of the city, but it's impossible to create another district out of those edge precincts.
Who are the people on the redistricting committee? The redistricting committee is represented by me as chairman, council members as mayor, council member Phipps, and council member Drace. A 4-member group. We will make a recommendation to the city council, who will ultimately have the final word on the maps. Are there any other maps that were proposed by community groups or council members that were not currently out for consideration? If so, why are they no longer being considered? Mr. McCarley.
There were a few other maps. Council member Braxton Winston asked us to draw a map that would be organized around transit corridors rather than working off of the present district maps. We did that. We did about 3 or 4 versions of that, and the committee discussed those. One of the problems with those maps is that they move an awful lot of precincts. In fact, they ended up moving probably 60,000 people from one district to another. And it was devised around a criteria that was not one of the adopted criteria for the committee. The committee did not have organization around transit corridors as one of the criteria. So those maps were not moved forward for continued consideration.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. We have the speaker, Brandon Milligans. Are you there? The floor is yours. Brandon? Okay.
You're unmuted if you're trying to speak.
Okay. How does the redistricting account for independent or non-affiliate voters? Mr. McCarley.
all of the precinct statistics that you'll see posted on the website show partisan registration for Democrat, Republican, and for other. And other is predominantly made up of unaffiliated voters, but it also includes libertarians and I think one other party that I can't remember at the moment, but those are statistically insignificant. The registration numbers that we use are typically those that are the two major parties, and that's what's referenced in the criteria in years past, and it's what we looked at to make some sort of assessment of whether or not any districts were harmed or helped on a partisan basis. We looked at those numbers, and all those numbers are posted on the website.
Thank you. We're going to try Brandon Minigans again. Brandon, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's Brendan McGinnis. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No problem. I joined the meeting about 15 minutes late, so apologies if this was asked earlier. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the current Republican registration is at 18%. And so if you multiply that by the amount of districts, that's 7. So basically, Republicans should have 1.25 districts. So I guess my question is, if they're by proportion, they're only do 1.25 districts, and they currently have 2 what would be considered safe districts, isn't that considered gerrymandering right there? In other words, why don't we make maps where at least one of those districts ended up being at least slightly competitive, so that they have to at least earn that second district rather than just be given?
Thank you for the question. Mr. McCarley.
Short answer is that I wouldn't call either District 6 or 7 safe Republican districts. They have, their statistical analysis is that they have only about 31% Republican registration. Those 2 districts are basically equal Republican, Democratic, and other unaffiliated, basically, registration, a third, and a third. The second thing I would say is that District 6 and 7 fairly well represent communities of interest. If you look at economic statistics and racial data and issues that are common to those 2 districts, I think that you would end up drawing those districts relatively close to what they look like today based on communities of interest, even if you weren't looking at partisan registration data.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley.
Mr. Chairman, could I comment on that? Because the comment is off on the math. There are 18.7% registered Republicans and 46.5% registered Democrats, but the unaffiliated voters tend to split roughly in line with those 2. So in elections, Republicans get votes from unaffiliated voters, and in fact, the number of voters in Charlotte that typically vote Republican is more like 30%. So there is nothing wrong with the current representation of Republicans on City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Will the 3 maps present maintain the current socioeconomic status of the current districts? Mr. McCarley.
That's a subjective question, but I would think the answer is relatively yes. The only one that really makes a difference based on socioeconomic analysis is in Draft Plan A, moving Precinct 77 from 3 into 6 is not a very close match for the demographics or the income levels of the people in that precinct with the remaining people in District 6 as it stands today.
Okay. Mr. McCarley, this is for you as well. How do these changes impact utility and first responder day-to-day activities?
Not at all. Nothing about these maps changes response areas for first responders. Nothing about this changes where somebody votes. The only thing this changes is who the people in that precinct are voting for in the district seats. Doesn't affect anything else.
Okay. Do we have any questions or any comments? We've had a pretty good, what time is it? Almost an hour into this, and I think we touched on a number of points and comments from the public, and so I see no questions. I see no individuals with their hand raised for one to speak, so we'll just pause and again, I'll just reiterate where we're headed next, right? And so again, tonight we are accepting feedback and comments from the general public. The council and the committee, rather, will take those comments and feedback under consideration as we begin to adjust the maps if necessary, based on what we hear tonight. Council members also are looking and watching what we're doing, and they too are members of the public as well, and will have their impact and comments as well to these maps. And so we will make adjustments when and if necessary. We have a public hearing coming up on October 18th, which will give the public yet another opportunity to weigh in. It is my desire for the committee to make a recommendation to the full City Council for consideration, and we made a pledge, a promise, an action item to deliver the maps that we recommend to the mayor and the council for a November 8th vote. We do have some work to do between now and then. The maps that you see in front of you are subject to change based on what we're hearing tonight. And of course, we have deadlines to meet in November to get these maps approved by the council and then to the Board of Elections so they can notify those citizens who are impacted by the changes in precinct by mail, and that the candidates who will be running for office will know where these maps fall. And so a lot of work to be done between now and then, and that's why we're here to get feedback from you, the general public. And with that, we have more questions. So I think I did a good job. Can we get a list? Can we get a list to the communities of interest? I guess an outline of, and I know we talked about that before, Mr. McCauley. Is there a way for us to kind of post that on the website for the redistricting?
No, sir, there's not. There is no specific list of communities of interest. It is a very subjective criteria, and it's almost like the Supreme Court said about pornography. You know it when you see it, and we have to try and balance when we look at any particular precinct to be moved, whether it has more in common with the district we're moving it into than it had with the district we're moving it from. But it's a pretty subjective analysis and largely has to do with income, race, and location. For example, precincts around Eastland Mall might have more interest in that project. Precincts around the airport will have more interest in what goes on at the airport. It's a very subjective criteria, admittedly.
Thank you, Mr. McCarley. Here's another question. How does the city planning department calculate anticipated growth in districts? Why is anticipated growth allowed under the concept of one person, one vote? I thought the 2020 census determined the number of voters. Mr. McCarley.
Let's take the last part of that first, and the answer is yes. We must use the census numbers as they're given to us by the Census Bureau. However, because we have the ability to be 5% above or 5% below the ideal district size, that allows us to look at what kind of growth we could anticipate in any of these districts. And in districts 3, 2, and 4, there is available land for additional development. There are subdivisions already approved but not yet built. There are areas for annexation and growth. And the planning department uses all of the data they have to look at that and to give us some estimates of which of those districts are likely to grow. When you look at the map, you can see by evidence that it's unlikely that 7, 6, or 7, 6, or 1 are likely to grow simply because 6 and 1 are landlocked and 7 is hemmed in basically by the state line. So you're looking at more growth anticipated in 3, 2, and 4, not as much on the outer edge of 5.
Thank you. Another question, was there a chart showing the various items, i.e. social, economic, political factors, and full balance to the equality of the districts, a complete chart? I guess just factors and items that you considered when you drew the maps.
The planning department loaded for us a fair amount of data into each precinct so that as we pull up any specific precinct, we can see its total population, its population broken down by race and ethnicity, its population broken down by registered voters, and then that registered voters broken down into Democratic, Republican, and other. And we used all of that data to try and construct that. But we also used the subjective data of just looking at the map and saying what neighborhoods are in that precinct and do they have more in common with the neighborhoods that are in another district or with the one that they're in or the one that we're proposing to move them to. But again, I would say to you that this is not as, it's not as scientific as that sounds. The primary goal has to always be balancing population in accordance with the constitutional requirement of one person, one vote. So as we're moving them, if you've got a district that has very few things on its edge that match what's already in it, there aren't a lot of choices because almost all of the movement occurs on the edges of those districts from one district to another, edge to edge.
Thank you. Question, can you please share the URL for where we can find all this information online? Yes, we can. That information can be found at cltgov.me/redistricting. That's cltgov.me/redistricting. And if you have any questions that you'd like to email us, you can email us at redistricting@charlottenc.gov. So there's plenty of ways for you to review the information, send questions by email, and we'll be very responsive to your questions and your comments. Okay? Ms. Hamphill, please welcome. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you guys for taking my second question. And this is to kind of piggyback off, I believe his name was Kenneth Cunningham. Forgive me if I'm saying his name incorrectly, but with this redistricting that is being considered for the non-affluent areas, are there any plans from the city to implement affordable housing, a new school, a new grocery store, so that those areas aren't considered areas of interest or communities of interest and continue to remain depressed areas of Charlotte?
Thank you for the question, Mr. McCarley.
This project is limited to trying to redraw the districts to comply with the constitutional requirement of one person, one vote. I know that the council considers affordable housing in their zoning decisions. They look at it with the Housing Trust Fund. There are all sorts of ways those issues come up. But no, there's nothing about the redistricting that specifically tries to address those changes.
Thank you for the response. Thank you for the question.
Mr. Chair, could I comment on that?
The floor is yours.
I want to emphasize our 2040 plan is very focused on many of those issues, on housing issues and social justice, equity, and that plan is not affected by this. And I don't expect that the support of council for the plan, the portion that we've adopted or the work that remains to be done would be affected by the changes that could occur as a result of this redistricting. So I think you can look elsewhere for what the city is doing to address those issues and assume that this redistricting will not have much of an effect on that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Mr. McCarley, how will District 2 voters be impacted by the 3 map options?
District 2 does not change very much. In maps B and C, there are several precincts on the northern edge of what is now District 3 that move north into District 2. And then we have to move some precincts out of District 2 into 4 or 1 to compensate for that. But it doesn't dramatically change the shape or character of District 2.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the response. I understand there can be more changes to the current proposals. However, is it possible to get a copy of these 3 current proposals? I am the Democratic Precinct 110 Secretary. Thank you for the question. You can go to cltgov.me/redistricting. That's cltgov.me/redistricting, and the maps, data, everything is right there for your convenience. Thank you for the question. Okay, so we are now at 7:05. We've been at it for about exactly an hour. We got a little late start. Again, if there's any questions for the committee that you would love to email to us, you can do that by emailing us to redistricting@charlottenc.gov. That's redistricting@charlottenc.gov. If you want to take a closer look at the maps, you can do it at cltgov.me/redistricting. All the maps are there, all the data is there, all current information about the process is there. Here's another question. What is the anticipated average home values of future development in those districts identified for growth? Will this sway the potential profile of the constituents and the districts to one party over another? Mr. McCarley.
I wish we had that data. We do not, and it was not considered when we were drafting the districts. I would tell you, though, that almost all of that growth is going to be out on the edge of the city, and there's not much way to put that growth in any district other than the district that it's attached to.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McCarley. Are there any other comments, questions, feedback for the committee, suggestions, recommendations? Again, our rollout time is, again, today is October 5th, and we're here to take public input from the community based on the 3 proposals that were submitted by Mr. McCarley to the committee that the committee has approved and adopted for public consumption. Those are map A, B, and C. They can be found at cltgov.me/redistricting. All the data, maps, facts, figures, everything is right there for your consideration. If you have emails that you want to email to us, you can do that at redistricting@charlottenc.gov. Again, moving forward, we have a October 18th public hearing, and hopefully we will land this plane November 8th on the Charlotte City Council's docket for consideration. And so there's a lot of work to be done between now and then, but this is a giant step forward tonight, hearing from our public in reference to the work that we have done thus far. I'll pause at this point to see if there's any comments from my committee members. You've heard a lot tonight. We're trying to pause to make sure that we capture as many comments as we can while we're here. Any comments from the committee members?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Greg Phipps.
Yes, sir. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Any changes to the current maps that we have outlined with the 3, as the process goes, if there are changes that result from comments from the public that we received tonight, or if there are any changes precipitated by council members, will there be a D map to show what changes were made apart from what's presented to us with these 3 maps?
That's a good question, Mr. Phipps. And with the consent of the committee, it's my goal that we listen carefully tonight, take the input that we hear tonight, as well as input that we will certainly get from council members into consideration. Now, we're tentatively planning, hopefully, a meeting next week, if it fits everyone's schedule, to make any adjustments, amendments to those maps if necessary. Again, I would love to even make a recommendation so that when we have the public hearing on the 18th, the public is reacting to a recommended map from the committee to the council. Now, that's my thinking as chairman. Certainly, if the committee has another scenario that they would like to see play out, I'm not married to that as well. I think that kind of works fine. But again, that's up to the members of this committee in terms of how they want to move forward. But certainly, I think there will be minor modifications based on what I'm hearing. And I think we should be ready and poised based on the feedback we've gotten from the community, as well as the council members, to put forward a recommendation for consideration for the council and have that recommended map be up for public consideration at the public hearing. So the public hearing would be exactly the recommendation of this committee. Now, that's my thinking, and I'm willing to go a different direction based on the will of the committee.
I agree with that approach, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Ashmera.
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
I agree with that approach as well. I'm encouraged by the fact that what we heard tonight did not suggest that we're way off the mark with these maps. It sounds to me as if many of the questions were informational. There were a couple of comments that might cause us to go back and look at one or two kind of community of interest questions. But I think we're very close here. So I'm encouraged that we will be able to stick to your timetable and get this done in the indicated time frame.
Thank you, sir. I think the modification we're talking about is relatively minor in nature, right? I don't see a whole lot of moving 20 precincts or 10 precincts, maybe 1, 2, maybe 3, based on what I'm hearing thus far. And certainly that would be a committee's decision that we'll bring forward. But I think that's the best way to do it. And I think we're close, right? We're flying this plane pretty well.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Floor is yours.
I think that any changes to the maps, other than what we have here, we would have to detail and explain the compelling reason for the change, and what, if any, impact, if any, they would have, which looks like, you had mentioned that it would be negligible. Then it would beg to question, if it is negligible, why would we be changing it? So I would hope that we would describe in a certain specificity why the changes were made and why we deem them necessary changes from the maps that are presented here tonight.
Point well taken. We have two questions. Is there a historic documentation list showing past redistricting and the outcome of that per follow-up census details? And so do we keep a record of what we did 10 years ago and
map is 10 years old. There's been no redistricting since. Every 2-year annexation program, the city redistricted after each major annexation, which was every 2 years. I'm sure that those maps are probably stored somewhere in the city, but we didn't look at any of those for this process. We looked at what the present map looks like and compared that to the census data and the rebalance of population that was required this time based on the 2020 census.
Thank you. So another question, what is the time frame used as a base for anticipated growth? 1, 2, 4 years?
We didn't try to put a number on it. We simply looked at where was the growth occurring. And frankly, that was also easily measured by looking at the growth that has occurred in the last 10 years and where that occurred. And that was predominantly in districts 3, 2, and 4. So if there is an ability to keep any districts under the ideal size, it's 3, 2, and 4 that we would be aiming to do that with. Just for people who haven't thought about this before. The issue here is that one person, one vote is the constitutional requirement. We're not required to redistrict again halfway through the decennial census period unless there are major annexations that would justify it. But if you're looking at why does growth matter, the larger the population over the ideal size, the less valuable a vote in that district is. Just to use a wild example, if there are 100 people in one district and 50 people in the other district, then the people in the 100-member district have a vote that's worth half as much as the people in the district with only 50 people residing in it. So the goal is to try and keep those districts that are growing from starting at or above the ideal size and simply outgrowing that 5% quicker. If they're going to grow by 8%, it'd be nice to have them start at 3% under.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've done a lot of good work here tonight. We've exhausted the questions coming in from our social media channels as well as those who have raised their hands. We've been in at an hour. So I just want to thank the public for tuning in and being a part of what we're doing. Again, if there's anyone out there who wants additional information about the maps, the data, they can go to cltgov.me/redistricting. That's cltgov.me/redistricting. Maps, data, facts, figures, everything there for you. And upon reading that, if you have any additional questions, you can email those questions at redistricting@charlottenc.gov. That's redistricting@charlottenc.gov. I want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. McCarley. You were on the hot seat all night tonight. You've demonstrated good skills. So we want to appreciate you for all the work that you've done and being here with us tonight. I also want to thank staff for their presence here tonight. A lot of work.